Ever since I started using Sony cameras years ago, one of my favorite lenses has been the Sony 70-200mm f4G. Why? Because even if it's a 70-200 lens, it is fairly light and easy to carry around and has good image quality. But I recently found out that that lens has actually existed for almost a decade. And while I've always loved that lens, there are some things that I wanted it to have. And now, almost a decade after, we have the update. This is the second version, the Sony 70-200mm f4G OSS Mark II. A bit of a mouthful, but actually there's one more word that I will tell you about because it's a twist in terms of the features of this lens. Now, this is lighter, and without the lens hood, it's at 6.8 inches. That's about 1 to 1.5 inches shorter than other similar versions. But of course, it extends the barrel when you zoom in, and it has an additional maybe 3 to 3.5 inches more when you zoom in. Now, of course, it comes with this lens hood similar to the old one. It comes with the tripod collar, and we have quite a few switches on the side panel. Now, the first switch is, of course, the autofocus switch. You can turn off the AF, and that's technically nothing new. But the next switch is the full-time DMF switch. What is full-time DMF? Basically, this allows you to have finer controls with your autofocus. What does it do? It allows you to override the AF so that you can guide the autofocus on what you want it to focus in. And this is particularly helpful whenever you're shooting something close and something with a lot of detail or with very narrow depth of field. That has been a feature that many videographers and photographers have been loving because it gives you more control of the focusing. That is, of course, in addition to the other focus features such as subject recognition, the AF tracking, and everything in between. But considering this is a 70-200mm, you would think that that's not much of a problem because it's f4. But what if I tell you that this can actually move in and shoot much closer? Yes, the official name of this is the FE4 70-200 Macro G OSS II. Yes, this is a 70-200mm f4G with OSS with macro. Basically, what this allows you to do is focus within 2 centimeters from your subject to the front element of the lens. And considering this is a telephoto lens, that is very close for a telephoto lens. Of course, the actual minimum focusing distance would depend on your focal length. If you are at 70, you're going to be able to shoot closer, but if you're zooming in at 200, you will have to step back a bit. Now, the next switch will be the focus range. Basically, you have a switch that allows you to use the full focus range. Then you flick it and you can be from infinity to 3 meters. So this is basically the distant objects. And when you switch it all the way to the more proximal end of the lens, you switch to macro. What does that mean? It's going to hunt and prioritize for details that are much closer to the front element of the lens, which means that it's going to prioritize focusing on closer and smaller objects. In addition to that, we have the OSS on and off and the OSS modes that we all know and love from the older versions of the 70-200mm lens. Now you might be thinking, hey, it's a 70-200mm lens. What do you have to say about that? There's actually so many things to say about that. Not because of the range, because we all know that there are so many 70-200mm lenses in the market. But there are a lot of implications with all these new features. Of course, the focusing is now made more capable to adapt with the fast autofocus system of the newer Sony cameras, especially the Sony a7R5, the Sony a1, and the like. In addition, this expanded focus range will allow you to use it as a secondary macro lens or a secondary details lens, for example. And for me as a landscape and architecture photographer, or maybe specifically as a landscape photographer, that allows me now to shoot more things, to photograph more things that I've been always interested in, because I don't even have to switch lenses to shoot intimate landscapes, to shoot abstracts, and to shoot macro. Now there's one additional feature that will actually expand this lens and the usability even further, and that is basically the compatibility with this. This is the Sony 2x teleconverter. Of course, there is also a 1.4x teleconverter. Basically, with the teleconverter, your 70-200 f4 can now be a 140-200mm f8. Now, yes, it will be f8, your maximum aperture will be f8, but considering that the usage of this is mostly outdoors, and when you're doing that in daylight, that's not actually going to be an issue. If you're thinking of the depth of field, you will have a lot of room for depth of field. You will have a lot of room for bokeh because, of course, this is a telephoto lens. Now, virtually, you now have a full frame camera at 70-400 if you attach the teleconverter. You want more range, then all you have to do is assign one of your buttons to be the APS-C mode or the crop mode. And when you press that button, for me that's the AEL button, when you press that button with the teleconverter, technically you can go as far as 600mm on an APS-C. And remember, I'm using the Sony a7R5. That means even with a 1.5 crop of the sensor, you will still have around 40 megapixels. Still a lot of room to crop even more. To be honest, I was initially underwhelmed with the thought of a new 70-200mm f4, but once I found out what is added to this lens, all the things that this lens can do that other similar versions cannot, I am actually excited about it because, again, it expands the range of things that you can do with just a single lens. Of course, this isn't limited to just outdoor and landscape photography. I can imagine a lot of portrait shooters being able to use this lens because, of course, the 70-200mm range is a really good lens for that. I can imagine a lot of wedding photographers, especially those who shoot outdoors with the couple, for example, and then later on they have to shoot the finer details of the wedding, like for example the rings or the invitations or whatever. They don't even need to switch to another lens just to shoot those details because, again, this can focus much closer. Of course, with cityscapes, it's going to be a no-brainer. Even with the relatively low light at night, it's going to be easy for this lens to focus, so that's nothing to worry about. Now, as an architectural photographer, this is something that I don't say a lot, but if the situation actually allows for it, my favorite lens for shooting architecture is a 70-200mm. Why? If you have a bit of distance from the structure that you're photographing, maybe a few blocks away, then you can shoot with a telephoto lens and not have to worry about any distortion because, again, it is a telephoto lens. If ever you have to tilt down or tilt up because of the difference in height of your vantage point and the structure, that's going to be very easy to fix in post, and there won't be any loss in image quality because the adjustment will be minimal. So if you have the luxury of space to back up, if your vantage point has a bit of distance between you and the structure, use a 70-200, and of course this lens can be really helpful for you. Now, in terms of shooting outdoors, in terms of landscape photography, one of the favorite things for me to do recently has been to shoot atmospheric landscapes. That means I go up to a mountain and look for cliffs and basically look for views with a lot of low clouds or even fog and just photograph them immersed with the trees and the mountains in general. And that's something I always enjoy doing, and of course a 70-200mm lens on its own is very capable of doing that. In addition, if you use a 2x teleconverter, then you can shoot more intimate landscapes with that, and that's going to be very good in terms of detail and up close, so you don't even need to crop. Now, another feature that will be very good hand in hand with the close focusing of this lens will be the automated focus stacking feature or the focus bracketing on the A7R5. If you're not familiar, what that does is basically automate the focus stacking shooting process or the focus bracketing, which basically lets you choose where you focus and how big the steps it's going to take to shoot from front to back. And that's going to make it easier in terms of focus stacking in post because everything is automated. What that's going to do is if you need to focus really close, you're going to have a very, very narrow depth of field. So for you to be able to get small things that are actually huge in the frame in detail, what you're going to have to do is combine many different exposures and combine them in post. Now what we're used to is we have to manually focus the lens so that we can get every layer, but with the focus bracketing feature on the A7R5, that becomes automated. And honestly, while I was doing that, when I was shooting all these little details out in nature, it was so easy that I felt like I was cheating. Of course, I'm here today at Macro G Reserve, one of my favorite places to go to whenever I want to shoot nature. And there are so many things I've shot here, and yet I still had a lot of new discoveries for myself today. Especially because today I focused on the little things. I really enjoyed shooting the details of this tree, which they call a Jurassic tree here in Macro G Reserve, because the lineage of this tree dates back 350 million years ago. That's a time before the dinosaurs. And this particular tree, they say, is around 75 years old. And they had to wait such a long time just to see the flower and the seeds of this tree. I enjoyed taking quite a bit of time photographing it, especially up close, because you will also see some insects on it. And I just enjoyed using the very close focusing distance of this lens to do that. Another thing that amazed me today is, of course, photographing this leftover shell of a cicada that was left on the trunk of a tree, because number one, it's my first time to see the shell of a cicada, and number two, it was really nice because also, even if the actual insect wasn't there anymore, the camera was still focusing on its eyes. I mean, that's the AI of the A7R5 right there. So in general, as a landscape photographer, as a wannabe nature photographer, as a wannabe conservation photographer, as an architectural photographer, as a cityscape photographer, this lens already has so many applications that I have already tried and some more applications that I can imagine. This will also, of course, be useful for portrait photographers, events photographers, sports photographers. And again, of course, these lenses are made to be modular and adaptable to many different shooting styles. So I can foresee that whoever already uses a 70 to 200 millimeter will have a lot of love for this lens. And those who wanted more close focusing on 70 to 200 millimeters will definitely love the upgrade. And so there, if you have any questions, of course, leave them down below in the comment section. And if you're new to the channel, my name is Nicco Valenzuela. I'm a landscape and architectural photographer. And if you are into any of the things that I talk about, landscape, architecture, nature, and all the gear, then do click that subscribe button and that notification bell. And I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.